Morgan Winters stared at her reflection in the elevator's polished brass doors. At 35, she had achieved what many would consider success: senior executive at Pinnacle Innovations, one of the city's most prestigious tech firms. Yet the face looking back at her showed the strain of someone fighting a silent battle every day. "Hold the door." She instinctively pressed the button as Richard Harmon, her boss, strode in with his usual air of entitlement. He barely acknowledged her presence with a curt nod before turning to his phone. "Big presentation today," Morgan ventured, clutching her portfolio containing weeks of research and innovative strategies she'd developed for their newest client. "Indeed," Richard replied without looking up. "I've been working on this pitch for weeks. The board is expecting something revolutionary." Morgan's stomach tightened. "My pitch, my research, my ideas." But she remained silent, having learned that corrections only branded her as difficult or oversensitive. The conference room was already filling with board members when they arrived. Morgan took her usual seat slightly off to the side while Richard commanded the head of the table. "Before we begin," announced CEO Victoria Chambers, "I want to congratulate the team on landing the Westbrook account. It's exactly the kind of high-profile client we need right now." Morgan allowed herself a small smile. She had been the one who cultivated that relationship over months of careful networking. "Thank you, Victoria," Richard interjected smoothly. "Sometimes you just need to know the right approach with these old-school clients." The familiar sting of erasure washed over Morgan as Richard launched into the presentation she had created. Slide after slide of her work, her market analysis, her innovative solutions, all presented as his brainchild. When a board member questioned the financial projections, Richard hesitated momentarily. "Morgan, would you like to address that?" "You assisted with some of the background research." "Assisted?" After 3 sleepless nights finalizing those numbers. "Of course," Morgan replied, her voice steady despite the humiliation. She explained the complex financial model she'd developed, watching as understanding dawned on the board members' faces. "Excellent support work, Morgan," Richard concluded, reclaiming control. "As I was saying," the meeting continued in this vein. Morgan's ideas presented as Richard's, her contributions minimized, her presence nearly forgotten until needed to explain a complex detail or defend a challenging question. After the presentation, Victoria approached them both. "Impressive work. The board is very pleased with this direction." "Thank you," Richard beamed. "I've been developing this approach for some time." Morgan stood silently beside him, invisible yet essential, like so many women before her. Back at her desk, an email from HR appeared in her inbox. The subject line read, "Executive Promotions Announcement." With trembling fingers, she opened it. Pinnacle Innovations is pleased to announce the promotion of Richard Harmon to Executive Vice President of Strategy, following his exceptional work on recent client acquisitions and innovative market approaches. Morgan closed the email, a cold realization settling over her. The promotion she had been working toward for years, the one she had been repeatedly assured was coming, had just been given to the man who had built his career on her ideas. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Did you get it? Celebration?" "Dinner tonight." Morgan stared at the message, tears threatening to spill. She had told her family about the likely promotion, wanting them to be proud of her after years of sacrifice. She typed back, "Not this time. Rain check?" As the office emptied for the day, Morgan remained at her desk, surrounded by evidence of her contributions, reports bearing her name buried in appendices, strategies she'd crafted now attributed to others, innovations she'd pioneered now claimed by men who had initially dismissed them. A janitor appeared in the doorway, surprised. "To find someone still working. Sorry to disturb you, ma'am. Just doing my rounds." "It's fine," Morgan replied, suddenly seeing herself through his eyes. A woman alone in an empty office, clinging to a place that didn't value her. "Long day?" he asked kindly. Morgan nodded, gathering her things. Very long day. Actually, it's been a very long 5 years. As she walked toward the elevator, a new resolve began to form. Something had to change. She couldn't continue being the invisible force behind others' success. Tomorrow, she would request a meeting with Victoria. It was time to be seen. What Morgan didn't know as she left the building that evening was that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine, that the corner office she deserved would come, but not in the way she had planned, and that her greatest professional triumph was waiting on the other side of what would soon become her darkest hour. The next morning, Morgan arrived at the office earlier than usual. She had rehearsed her talking points all night, preparing for her meeting with Victoria. Her portfolio contained documented evidence of her contributions, emails, early drafts with her comments, meeting notes where her ideas were first proposed. After 5 years of being overlooked, she was finally ready to advocate for herself. "Do you have a minute?" Morgan asked, standing at Victoria's open door. The CEO glanced up from her computer. "Morgan, come in. I was actually going to call you today." A flutter of hope rose in Morgan's chest as she took a seat. Perhaps Victoria had already recognized the oversight. "I wanted to discuss my contributions to the company," Morgan began carefully, "particularly regarding the Westbrook account and the strategy presentation yesterday." Victoria's expression shifted subtly. "Yes, about that. Richard mentioned you might be feeling underappreciated." Morgan's pulse quickened. "He spoke to you about me?" "He was concerned that you might be having some difficulties with the team dynamic," Victoria said, her tone measured. "He mentioned you've been resistant to collaborative work." The accusation hit Morgan like a physical blow. "That's not true. I've led most of the collaborative efforts on our projects. My concern is that my work is consistently being presented as someone else's." Victoria's expression hardened. "Morgan, success at Pinnacle requires being a team player. Individual recognition isn't as important as company outcomes." "I understand teamwork, Victoria. What I'm describing is systematic erasure of my contributions." Morgan opened her portfolio. "I've documented instances where my work was—" "This is exactly the problem," Victoria interrupted, not even glancing at the evidence. "This, keeping score. Richard warned me about this tendency." Morgan felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "Richard has been taking credit for my work for years. The Westbrook strategy was entirely my creation. The financial model that impressed the board? Mine. The innovative approach to market penetration? Also mine." Victoria's face grew cold. "These are serious accusations against a senior executive who has consistently delivered results for this company because he's using my work." Morgan's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "I can prove it. Just look at the documentation." "I think we need to take a step back," Victoria said, standing up. "This kind of divisive attitude isn't what we foster at Pinnacle." "Divisive?" Morgan echoed in disbelief. "Is that what we're calling workplace theft now?" The door opened behind her, and Morgan turned to see Richard standing there with HR Director Pamela Stevens. "Is everything all right?" Richard asked, his concern so convincingly performed that for a moment even Morgan almost believed it. Morgan was just expressing some concerns about team recognition, Victoria said carefully. Richard's expression shifted to one of practiced disappointment. "I was afraid of this. After yesterday's success, I hoped we'd moved past these issues." "What issues?" Morgan demanded, looking between the three of them, suddenly aware she had walked into something orchestrated. Pamela stepped forward. "Morgan, we've received several reports about your behavior creating a negative work environment. Combined with today's accusations, we feel it's best if we part ways." The world seemed to tilt beneath Morgan's feet. "You're firing me? For speaking up about having my work stolen?" "We're terminating your employment due to documented patterns of disruptive behavior and inability to work collaboratively," Pamela stated formally. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. This is retaliation, Morgan said, her voice shaking. And it's illegal. You'll find your separation agreement includes a generous severance package, Pamela continued, as if Morgan hadn't spoken. Contingent, of course, on standard non-disparagement clauses. A security guard appeared in the doorway. Morgan looked at the faces around her, people she had worked alongside for years, now regarding her as a threat to be removed. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years of my life, my ideas, my work, and this is how it ends. As she was escorted to her desk, colleagues averted their eyes. The few who dared to watch saw a woman holding herself with dignity even as her professional life crumbled around her. Morgan placed her personal items in a box, a small plant, family photos, a coffee mug her niece had painted. The security guard stood impassively nearby, as if she might steal company property. Her computer had already been locked, her access badge deactivated, 5 years erased in minutes. Outside the building, Morgan stood on the sidewalk, clutching her box of belongings, unsure what to do next. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "How's your day going, VP?" The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed for, gone. And worse, her professional reputation was now tarnished with accusations of being difficult and not a team player, the career death knell for women in corporate America. That evening, as Morgan sat in her apartment surrounded by job search websites, her phone lit up with LinkedIn notifications. Curious colleagues checking her profile after hearing about her sudden departure, she assumed. Instead, she found something far worse. A former colleague had forwarded her a company-wide email from Richard. "While we don't normally discuss personnel matters, given Morgan Winter's abrupt departure and the questions some of you have raised, I want to assure the team that Pinnacle remains committed to a collaborative, positive work environment. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made to preserve our culture of excellence." Morgan couldn't read further. The character assassination was clear. She was being painted as the problem. Her legitimate concerns reframed as personality defects. Over. The following weeks, Morgan discovered the full extent of the damage. Recruiters who had once eagerly pursued her suddenly had no suitable openings. Former colleagues stopped returning her calls. The industry she had dedicated her career to had effectively blacklisted her based on whispered warnings and professional smears. At night, lying awake in the darkness, Morgan confronted the bitter reality that speaking truth to power hadn't brought justice. It had cost her everything. Her savings were dwindling, her confidence shattered, her future uncertain. But beneath the pain and humiliation, something else was taking root. A quiet, steely determination. If the corporate world she knew wouldn't allow her to succeed on her merits, perhaps it was time to create something new, something built on different values. Something that couldn't be taken away. She just had to figure out how to rise from these ashes. 3 months after her dismissal from Pinnacle, Morgan sat at her kitchen table, now serving as her office, staring at her dwindling bank account. On her laptop screen, the severance package that had seemed generous initially was rapidly disappearing beneath the weight of rent, health insurance, and basic living expenses. The non-disparagement clause she'd signed in a moment of shock and vulnerability now felt like a muzzle preventing her from defending her reputation. "You have to eat something," her sister Elaine insisted, placing a sandwich beside Morgan's computer. "I'm not hungry," Morgan replied, though she couldn't remember when she'd last had a proper meal. "Any responses to your applications?" Elaine asked, though her careful tone suggested she already knew the answer. Morgan closed the banking app and sighed. 17 applications this week, 3 automated rejections, 14 ghostings. "It's their loss," Elaine said, with the fierce loyalty of a younger sister. "Is it?" Morgan's voice cracked slightly. "Because from where I'm sitting, It feels very much like my loss." The truth was, Morgan had underestimated how effectively Richard and Victoria could poison the well. In an industry built on connections and reputation, whispers traveled fast. She wasn't just dealing with the loss of a job. She was fighting an invisible character assassination campaign. "Maybe it's time to look outside tech," Elaine suggested gently. "Your skills would transfer to other industries." Morgan nodded absently, though the thought of abandoning the field she loved felt like another defeat. Still, pride wouldn't pay. The bills and her emergency fund had a rapidly approaching expiration date. Later that evening, while scrolling through job listings that either undervalued her experience or required connections she no longer had, Morgan received an unexpected email. "Dear Ms. Winters, my name is Elena Rodriguez, owner of Bloom Botanicals, a small eco-friendly skincare startup. We're struggling with our business strategy and market positioning. A former colleague of yours, who prefers to remain anonymous, suggested you might be available for consulting work. Would you be open to discussing how you might help our small business?" Sincerely, Elena Rodriguez Morgan stared at the email, emotions conflicting. Consulting for a small business was far from her executive aspirations, but it was work, real work that might value her skills. And she was touched that someone from her past had recommended her, despite the rumors. The next morning, Morgan met Elena at a small cafe near the Bloom Botanicals workshop. Elena was younger than Morgan had expected, perhaps early 30s, with an energetic presence that contrasted with the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," Elena said, placing a small gift bag on the table. "Some samples of our products. They're good, really good, but nobody knows we exist." Morgan examined the beautifully packaged skincare items. "These are lovely. How long have you been in business?" 2 years, Elena sighed. "We've poured everything into product development and sustainability, but our marketing is, well, non-existent. We're 3 months from closing if something doesn't change." As Elena outlined her business challenges, Morgan found herself automatically analyzing problems and formulating solutions, the same mental process that had made her valuable at Pinnacle. For the first time in months, her mind felt engaged rather than defeated. "I think I can help you," Morgan said when Elena finished. "But I should be transparent. I'm not currently with a consulting firm. I would be working independently." Elena smiled. "I know about Pinnacle. My sister works in HR at Talaris Tech. The industry gossip machine is efficient." Morgan tensed. "Then you've heard their version of events." "I've heard enough to know when something doesn't add up," Elena replied. "More importantly, I've seen your work. That sustainability initiative you developed for Pinnacle last year? Brilliant. That's exactly the kind of thinking Bloom needs." By the end of their meeting, Morgan had her first client as an independent consultant. The fee was modest, but it was a start, and more importantly, it was someone willing to judge her on her merits rather than rumors. Over the following weeks, Morgan threw herself into revitalizing Bloom Botanicals' market strategy. Working from her kitchen table, she developed targeted digital campaigns, restructured their pricing model, and created partnership opportunities with local spas and wellness centers. For the first time since leaving Pinnacle, she felt purposeful again. Word began to spread among small business owners about the strategy whisperer who was helping struggling companies find their footing. By month's end, Morgan had 3 more clients: a family-owned bakery, a sustainable clothing boutique, and a tech startup run by recent graduates. None of these clients could pay what Pinnacle had, but together they provided enough income to extend her financial runway. More importantly, they offered something Pinnacle never had: appreciation for her contributions and recognition of her value. "You've completely transformed our business," Elena told her during their 6th week of working together. Bloom's sales had increased by 40% following Morgan's strategy implementation. We've had more orders this month than in the previous 6 combined." Morgan smiled, feeling a flicker of her old confidence returning. "I'm glad it's working." "It's more than working," Elena insisted. "It's saving us, which brings me to something I wanted to discuss." Elena explained that Bloom had received interest from a small investor group focused on women-owned businesses. The potential investment would allow them to expand, but they needed a solid business plan and growth strategy to secure the funding. "I can help with that," Morgan offered. "I was hoping for more than that," Elena said, looking suddenly nervous. "I was hoping you might consider becoming a partner in Bloom, not just a consultant, but part of the company." Morgan stared at her, speechless. "I know it's not the corporate executive path you were on," Elena continued quickly. "We're small and we're struggling, and I can't offer you anything close to what you're worth, but I can offer you equity in something with potential, something you're already helping to build." That night, Morgan sat on her balcony, considering Elena's offer. Becoming part owner of a small skincare startup hadn't been on her 5-year plan. It wasn't prestigious. It wouldn't impress her former colleagues or vindicate her in the eyes of the industry, but it would be hers, something that couldn't be stolen or attributed to someone else. Something she could build with her own hands, according to her own values. As she watched the city lights below, Morgan realized that perhaps losing everything had given her an unexpected freedom. The freedom to redefine success on her own terms. The next morning she called Elena. "I'm in," she said. "Let's build something together." What Morgan didn't yet realize was that this decision, made from a place of necessity and cautious hope, would set her on a path to create something far more significant than the corner office she had once coveted. "They're not taking us seriously," Elena said, frustration evident in her voice as she paced the small conference room they'd rented for investor meetings. 3 presentations, 3 rejections, and don't tell me it's just about our numbers." Morgan knew Elena was right. Though they'd spent weeks perfecting their business plan and growth strategy for Bloom Botanicals, the investor responses had been tepid at best, dismissive at worst. The most recent meeting had been particularly revealing when one investor had directed all his questions to their male graphic designer, who was only there to present the packaging redesign. "It's not just about our numbers," Morgan agreed, gathering their presentation materials. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying." 6 months had passed since Morgan had joined Bloom as a partner. In that time, they'd tripled their direct-to-consumer sales, established relationships with 15 boutique retailers, and developed 2 new product lines. By any objective measure, they were succeeding, yet securing the investment needed for significant expansion remained elusive. "Maybe we're approaching the wrong investors," Morgan said, as they walked back to their small office space, a converted industrial loft they shared with 3 other startups to save on overhead costs. "We keep pitching to traditional venture capital firms with overwhelmingly male partners who don't use or understand skincare products." Elena sighed. "The women-focused investment groups have much smaller funding pools. We'd get attention, but not the capital we need for manufacturing scale-up." Morgan stopped walking, a thought crystallizing. What if we create our own network? Our own investment network? "With what money?" Elena asked skeptically. "Not an investment network, a business network," Morgan clarified, excitement building in her voice. "All these small businesses I've been consulting for face the same challenges." "We do. What if we formalized those relationships, created a collective of women-owned businesses that support each other?" The idea took shape over late-night strategy sessions and early morning coffee meetings. Morgan reached out to her consulting clients and their extended networks, identifying women-owned businesses that complemented rather than competed with each other. Within weeks, the Bloom Collective was born, 15 small businesses ranging from skincare and fashion to tech services and food production, all committed to shared resources, cross-promotion, and collective negotiating power. Morgan's experience at Pinnacle, though painful, had given her insight into how larger corporations operated, knowledge she now used to benefit the collective. She negotiated better rates with suppliers by combining orders across businesses. She created shared distribution channels that reduced costs for everyone. Most importantly, she established a mentorship structure where each business owner contributed their unique expertise to strengthen the whole. "You've built something remarkable here," commented Diane Weber, a former executive who now ran a small business advisory firm. Morgan had invited her to observe one of the collective's quarterly meetings. This model addresses problems that traditional business structures ignore. "It was born from necessity," Morgan admitted. "None of us could get attention individually, but together we're harder to dismiss." "Have you considered that this collective model itself might be your most valuable innovation?" Diane asked. "More valuable even than Bloom's products?" The question lingered with Morgan for days afterward. While Bloom Botanicals was growing steadily, the collective was flourishing beyond anyone's expectations. Other small business owners were reaching out, asking to join. Local media had begun covering their collaborative approach as an innovative response to the challenges faced by women entrepreneurs. One evening, as Morgan worked late in their office, Elena brought in a stack of mail. "This came for you," she said, handing Morgan an envelope with familiar letterhead, "Pinnacle Innovations." Morgan's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was an invitation to speak at Pinnacle's annual innovation conference. The note, signed by Victoria Chambers herself, mentioned Morgan's groundbreaking work in collaborative business models and expressed interest in having her share insights as a valued former member of the Pinnacle family. "The audacity," Elena muttered, reading over Morgan's shoulder. "After what they did to you?" Morgan set the invitation down, conflicting emotions washing over her. "They're struggling," she said quietly. "I've heard rumors about Pinnacle losing market share. Richard's leadership isn't delivering the results they expected. So now they want to exploit your success to appear progressive and forward-thinking," Elena said bitterly, "without acknowledging how they treated you." Morgan stared out the window at the city skyline, thinking about the journey of the past year, from executive on the rise to unemployed and blacklisted, from kitchen table consultant to innovative business leader. The path had been painful, but it had led her to create something she never would have built within Pinnacle's restrictive hierarchy. "What if this is an opportunity?" Morgan said slowly. "Not for revenge, but for real change." "You can't seriously be considering accepting," Elena protested. "I'm considering what it would mean to stand on that stage, not as the woman they pushed aside, but as the founder of a successful business model that challenges everything they represent," Morgan replied. "Not to gloat or seek vindication, but to advocate for a different way of doing business." That night, Morgan drafted her response to Victoria's invitation. She would speak at the conference, not about her experience at Pinnacle, which the non-disparagement clause still prevented her from discussing openly, but about the future of collaborative business and the power of building systems that valued diverse contributions. As she prepared for bed, Morgan caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had stared at her reflection in Pinnacle's elevator a year ago. There was a confidence in her eyes now, not the brittle assurance that came from external validation, but the solid certainty of someone who had fallen, risen, and built something meaningful from the ruins. The corner office she had once coveted now seemed like a small ambition compared to the expansive vision she was bringing to life. She wasn't climbing a corporate ladder anymore. She was building an entirely new structure, one with room for many to rise together. The Pinnacle Innovations Conference Center buzzed with activity as Morgan made her way through the registration area. Despite her outward composure, her heart raced with a complex mix of emotions, anxiety, determination, and a strange sense of coming full circle. "Morgan Winters, I thought that was you." Morgan turned to see James Chen, Pinnacle's former head of product development, approaching with a warm smile. He had been one of the few executives who had always acknowledged her contributions. "James," she greeted him, genuinely pleased. "I didn't expect to see familiar faces." I left Pinnacle 6 months ago, he explained. The culture became, let's just say, it wasn't what I signed up for. I'm with Meridian Tech now. I heard they're doing impressive work, Morgan replied. James lowered his voice. Not as impressive as what you've built with the Bloom Collective. That's actually why I wanted to catch you. I've been following your progress. Before he could continue, an announcement called attendees to the opening session. James quickly handed Morgan his business card. Find me later. There's something important I want to discuss with you. Throughout the morning sessions, Morgan observed Pinnacle's current reality with the detached interest of an outsider. The company's presentations emphasized innovation and forward thinking, but she noticed a defensive undertone, a company trying to convince others, and perhaps itself, that it was still relevant. During the lunch break, Morgan found a quiet corner to review her presentation notes one last time. Her session, titled Collaborative Economics, the Future of Sustainable Business Growth, was scheduled for the afternoon. Ms. Winters. The familiar voice sent a chill down Morgan's spine. She looked up to see Richard Harmon standing before her, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional courtesy. Richard, she acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral. I wanted to personally thank you for accepting our invitation, he said. Your perspective will be valuable to our attendees. Morgan noted the careful wording, not valuable to Pinnacle, but to the attendees. Even now, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge her worth to the company. I'm happy to share insights about collaborative business models, she replied evenly. It's an approach that's shown remarkable results for smaller enterprises. A flicker of something, perhaps annoyance, perhaps respect, crossed Richard's face. Yes, I've heard about your collective. Quite the little community project. The dismissive tone was so familiar that Morgan almost laughed. Some things never changed. Our little community project generated $8 million in combined revenue last quarter, she stated calmly, with profit margins that would make your shareholders quite envious. Before Richard could respond, Victoria Chambers approached, her professional smile firmly in place. Morgan, wonderful to see you, she said, as if their last interaction hadn't involved security escorting Morgan from the building. Your session is generating quite a buzz. We've had to move it to the main auditorium to accommodate interest. Morgan. Recognize the power play. Victoria was asserting control, reminding Morgan that she was merely a speaker at Pinnacle's event, not an equal. Once, this would have intimidated her. Now, it merely informed her. I appreciate the consideration, Morgan replied. I'm looking forward to sharing our model with a wider audience. As they walked away, Morgan overheard Richard murmuring to Victoria, Are you sure this was wise? She could use this platform to... She signed the agreement. Victoria cut him off. Besides, we need to show we're embracing diverse business perspectives. The board is watching. Morgan smiled to herself. They still underestimated her. They thought this was about revenge or vindication, unable to comprehend that she had moved beyond the narrow confines of their corporate politics to something far more meaningful. When it was time for her session, Morgan was surprised to find the auditorium packed. She recognized faces from various industries, not just Pinnacle employees, but business leaders from across the sector. In the front row sat Elena and several members of the Bloom Collective, their presence a silent statement of solidarity. As Morgan took the stage, a strange calm settled over her. This wasn't the nervous energy she had felt presenting at Pinnacle meetings, always aware that her ideas might be stolen or dismissed. This was the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to share. Thank you for that introduction, she began after Victoria's perfunctory remarks. Today, I want to challenge how we think about business growth and success. For the next 45 minutes, Morgan outlined the collaborative model she had developed, not as a theoretical concept, but as a living, thriving reality. She shared concrete data on how the collective approach had reduced costs, increased market penetration, and created sustainable growth for businesses that traditional investors had overlooked. The future of business isn't about climbing over others to reach the top, she concluded. It's about building structures where many can rise together, where success is measured not just in profit margins, but in sustainability, equity, and shared prosperity. The applause that followed was thunderous. As Morgan fielded questions, she noticed Richard and Victoria at the back of the room, their expressions unreadable. They had expected a former employee seeking validation. Instead, they had witnessed a visionary outlining a future that made their hierarchical model seem outdated and inefficient. After the session, as attendees crowded around to continue the conversation, James Chen approached with a woman Morgan didn't recognize. "Morgan, this is Lydia Kaminsky, CEO of the Women's Investment Coalition," James introduced them. "She's very interested in what you've built." Lydia extended her hand. "That was extraordinary. Your collective model addresses problems we've been trying to solve for years. Would you be open to discussing how we might support scaling this approach nationally?" As they exchanged contact information, Morgan caught sight of Richard watching from across the room. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Morgan saw something she had never expected: uncertainty. For perhaps the first time, Richard Harmon was seeing her clearly, not as a subordinate to be managed or a threat to be neutralized, but as a formidable innovator whose path had diverged from his in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Later, as Morgan left the conference center with Elena and the collective members, she felt a weight lifting, the last remnants of her attachment to Pinnacle and what it had represented in her life. "You were brilliant," Elena said, linking her arm through Morgan's. "Did you see their faces when you showed our growth projections?" Morgan smiled. "I wasn't watching them. I was watching the audience, all those people taking notes, asking questions, seeing possibilities they hadn't considered before." "So what happens now?" asked Tara, one of the collective's newest members. Morgan looked back at the Pinnacle building, its corporate logo illuminated against the evening sky. Once that logo had represented everything she aspired to. Now, it seemed like a relic of an approach that was slowly becoming obsolete. "Now," Morgan said, turning away from the building to face her colleagues, "we build something better." "They're offering how much?" Elena gasped, nearly spilling her coffee across the conference table. Morgan slid the proposal document toward her partner. $5 million in initial funding, with potential for another $7 million in Phase 2. The Women's Investment Coalition wants to help us scale the collective model nationally. 3 weeks had passed since the Pinnacle conference. Morgan's presentation had generated unexpected attention, transforming the Bloom Collective from a local curiosity into a subject of serious business interest. Lydia Kaminsky's investment proposal was the most substantial offer, but not the only one. "This changes everything," Elena whispered, scanning the document. "With this kind of backing, we could expand beyond just connecting existing businesses. We could create an incubator for women entrepreneurs who've been shut out of traditional funding channels." Morgan nodded, her mind already mapping possibilities. Not just an incubator, a complete ecosystem. Funding, mentorship, shared resources, market access. "The anti-Pinnacle," Elena said with a smile. "I prefer to think of it as the post-Pinnacle model," Morgan corrected gently. "Not defined by what we're against, but by what we're building." As they discussed implementation details, Morgan's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it, then froze. "Morgan? What is it?" Morgan turned her phone so Elena could see the headline. "Pinnacle Innovations stock plummets amid leadership crisis. CEO Victoria Chambers facing board pressure to resign." The article detailed Pinnacle's third consecutive quarter of declining performance, internal conflicts among leadership, and growing shareholder unrest. Richard Harmon was quoted defending the company's direction, while anonymous sources described a toxic culture that had driven away key talent. "Karma," Elena murmured. Morgan set her phone down, surprised by her own reaction. She had imagined that news of Pinnacle's struggles would bring satisfaction, vindication even. Instead, She felt a complex mixture of emotions that included an unexpected thread of sadness for the company where she had once invested so much of herself. "It's not just karma," Morgan said thoughtfully. "It's the inevitable result of a business model that treats people as expendable resources rather than valuable contributors. Pinnacle has been hemorrhaging talent for years. I was just one of many." Before Elena could respond, Morgan's phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. "Morgan Winters," she answered. "Ms. Winters, this is Howard Griffith, chairman of the board at Pinnacle Innovations." Morgan's eyes widened as she mouthed, "Pinnacle Board," to Elena, who straightened in her chair. "What can I do for you, Mr. Griffith?" Morgan asked, keeping her voice neutral. "I'll be direct, Ms. Winters. Pinnacle is at a critical juncture. The board has lost confidence in the current leadership team. We're seeking someone who can guide the company in a new direction, someone with innovative vision and proven ability to build collaborative structures. Your name has come up repeatedly in our discussions." Morgan was momentarily speechless. Of all the scenarios she had imagined following her presentation at the conference, being courted to return to Pinnacle, especially in a leadership role, had never crossed her mind. "Are you offering me a position?" she asked when she found her voice. "We're offering you the opportunity to discuss becoming Pinnacle's new chief executive officer," Howard replied, "with full authority to restructure the organization as you see fit." The irony was almost too perfect. After being pushed out and maligned, she was being invited back to take the helm of the very company that had discarded her. The corner office that had once been her ambition was now being offered on a silver platter. "I appreciate the consideration, Mr. Griffith," Morgan said carefully. "This is unexpected. I would need time to consider such a significant proposition." "Of course. The board would like to meet with you next week to discuss details. Would Wednesday work for your schedule?" After arranging the meeting and ending the call, Morgan looked up to find Elena watching her with concern. "You're not actually considering it, are you?" Elena asked. "After everything they did?" Morgan leaned back in her chair, considering the question honestly. "A year ago, this would have been everything I wanted: vindication, recognition, the chance to prove I was right all along. And now?" Morgan gestured to the investment proposal on the table, to the whiteboard covered with their expansion plans, to the photos of the collective members that lined their office wall. "Now I understand that success isn't about climbing to the top of someone else's ladder. It's about building something that aligns with your values." She smiled at Elena. "Something that lifts others as you rise. So you'll turn them down?" Morgan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "I'll meet with them, not because I'm interested in the position, but because this is an opportunity to advocate for real change in an industry that desperately needs it." The following Wednesday, Morgan entered Pinnacle's headquarters for the first time since being escorted out over a year before. The security guard at the desk, a different one from that day, checked her ID and directed her to the executive floor, with a respectful "Ms. Winters." The boardroom fell silent as she entered. Howard Griffith rose to greet her, along with 7 other board members. Notably absent were Victoria Chambers and Richard Harmon. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Winters," Howard began after introductions were complete. "We've been following your work with the Bloom Collective with great interest. Your collaborative business model has achieved remarkable results. Results that Pinnacle could have benefited from if they'd valued my contributions." "When I was here," Morgan replied calmly. The directness of her statement created a momentary discomfort around the table. "That's precisely why we're having this conversation," Howard acknowledged. "Pinnacle took a wrong turn. We lost sight of what truly drives innovation, the people and the culture that nurtures their talents." For the next hour, the board outlined their vision for Pinnacle's transformation and the role they hoped Morgan would play. The offer was generous: complete authority to restructure, a compensation package that dwarfed anything she had previously earned, and the public recognition she had once craved. When they finished, Howard looked at her expectantly. What are your thoughts, Ms. Winters? Morgan took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not just since receiving their call, but in some ways since the day she had been forced out of this building. I'm declining your offer, she said clearly. Surprise registered on several faces. May I ask why? Howard inquired. If it's about compensation or authority, it's not about the terms, Morgan interrupted gently. It's about purpose and vision. What I'm building with the Bloom Collective isn't just another business, it's a fundamentally different approach to how we create value together. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the same city view she had once admired from her much smaller office. Pinnacle doesn't need me as CEO, she continued. What Pinnacle needs is to recognize that the future of business isn't found in hierarchical structures that concentrate power and credit at the top. It's in collaborative networks that distribute both more equitably. Turning back to face the board, Morgan offered an alternative. I won't join Pinnacle as CEO, but I am willing to consult with your transition team to help you implement elements of the collaborative model that might benefit Pinnacle's recovery, with the understanding that any engagement would be public and transparent. The board members exchanged glances, clearly not having anticipated this response. You've built something remarkable, Ms. Winters, Howard said finally. Something that perhaps couldn't have existed within Pinnacle's current structure. We respect your decision, though we're disappointed. As Morgan left the building that afternoon, she felt a profound sense of closure. The Pinnacle chapter of her life wasn't ending with the triumph of return or the bitterness of rejection. It was transforming into something more valuable, a lesson that would inform the more meaningful work ahead. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. How did it go? Do we need to find a new partner? Morgan smiled as she typed her response. Meeting finished. Turned down CEO offer. Heading back to our office. We have a collective to grow. As she walked away from Pinnacle's towering headquarters, Morgan realized that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't in claiming the corner office you were denied. It's in recognizing when you've outgrown the need for it altogether. And this is how we structured our mentorship program, Morgan explained, pointing to the slide showing the Bloom Collective's organizational structure. By pairing experienced businesswomen with newcomers, we create knowledge transfer while ensuring everyone contributes according to their strengths. 3 years had passed since Morgan declined the offer to become CEO of Pinnacle. The Bloom Collective had grown from 15 local businesses to a national network of over 200 women-led companies. With Lydia Kaminsky's investment, they established offices in 3 cities, with plans for international expansion on the horizon. After her lecture to business students, Morgan noticed a familiar figure at the back of the room, Richard Harmon. Older and less polished, he waited until everyone had left to approach. Impressive presentation, he said, his confidence visibly diminished. You always had a gift for strategy. What brings you here, Richard? Morgan asked, maintaining her composure. Curiosity, mainly. I've been following your success with the collective. It's different from what I expected. And what did you expect? I thought you'd build another version of what you knew, a traditional company with you at the top. I didn't expect you to create something entirely new. What have you been doing lately? Morgan asked, realizing she hadn't heard his name in business circles for some time. Consulting, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. It seems there's little demand for executives who presided over significant corporate declines. I owe you an apology, Richard finally said, for taking credit for your work, for how things ended at Pinnacle. Why now, Richard? It's been years. Because watching you today, I finally understood what I really took from you. Not just credit for ideas or a promotion, but the opportunity to become who you were meant to be in that company. As they parted, Morgan offered her card. Send me your information. We have a program for experienced executives transitioning to collaborative models. 5 years later, Morgan waited backstage to accept Time magazine's Business Innovator of the Decade Award. The Bloom Collective had evolved into the Bloom Network, an international organization supporting over 1,000 women-led businesses across 4 continents. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Time's Business Innovator of the Decade, Morgan Winters. Thank you for this extraordinary honor, Morgan began. Although I must immediately correct an assumption in the introduction. I am not the innovator being celebrated tonight. We are. She gestured to the Bloom Network members in the audience. 10. Years ago, I found myself at a crossroads many will recognize. I followed the rules of a system that ultimately did not value my contributions. I climbed a ladder only to discover that the rungs above were reserved for others. Morgan paused. Recalling the pain of that period, the humiliation, financial stress, shattered confidence. What happened next was not a solo journey of individual triumph. It was a collective discovery that the game itself was flawed, not just for me, but for countless talented people whose potential was being wasted by hierarchical structures that concentrated power and recognition at the top. Concluding her speech, Morgan introduced a new initiative, the Bloom Foundation, which would provide resources and mentorship to help traditional businesses transition to more collaborative models. This award does not mark the end of a journey, but a milestone in an ongoing transformation of how we work together. The Executive Office of the Future is not a private space of individual power. It is a gathering place where diverse voices contribute to a shared vision. After the ovation, Morgan was surprised by Victoria Chambers, her former CEO. "Congratulations, Morgan," Victoria said, extending her hand. "You have created something remarkable." "Thank you, Victoria. I have been following your work closely. The Bloom model addresses problems I never fully recognized during my time at Pinnacle. Problems I may have perpetuated." Morgan nodded, understanding the subtle apology in Victoria's words. "We all operated within the systems we knew. The important thing is being willing to envision something better." Later, at the celebration with the Bloom Network leadership team, Morgan found a moment of reflection. Looking around the table at the diverse group of women, some who had been with her from the beginning, others who joined along the way, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment that no corporate achievement could have provided. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from around the world, including one from Richard Harmon, who eventually joined the Executive Transition Program and now helps other corporate leaders adapt to collaborative models. "The speech of a lifetime," Elena said, sitting beside her. "Though I suspect you'll top it someday." Morgan smiled. "Maybe. But tonight I'm just grateful for the journey that brought us here, even the painful parts." "Especially the painful parts," Elena corrected. "Without Pinnacle's spectacular failure to value you, none of this would exist." Morgan raised her glass. "To unexpected blessings, then, and to all the women still fighting to have their value recognized, and to the executive office you deserved," Elena added with a smile, which turned out to be much bigger than anyone imagined. As the celebration continued around her, Morgan thought of the young executive she once was, ambitious, talented, and strictly focused on climbing a predefined ladder of success. How could that woman have known that her greatest contribution would not come from reaching the top of that ladder, but from helping to build an entirely new structure, one with room for many to grow together? The executive office she finally created was not confined by walls or defined by exclusivity. It was as expansive as the network of companies they helped flourish, as meaningful as the lives transformed through their work. In losing what she thought she wanted, Morgan found what she was meant to create. And in her personal pain, she discovered a purpose far greater than professional vindication, a legacy that would continue to grow long after tonight's award was forgotten. ¿Y tú? ¿Qué opinas de esta historia? ¿Te hizo llorar, sonreír o detenerte a pensar en la vida? En nuestro canal, cada relato es una invitación a sentir y reflexionar. Suscríbete ahora para más emociones como esta. Hasta la próxima.